It looked like a classic case of overfeeding to most of the visitors who gazed at the bloated, sluggish gorilla sitting in her cage. The animal barely moved, her belly swollen and distended, and she seemed uninterested in the food laid before her. Many assumed the zookeepers had simply been too generous with her meals. But for those who knew the zoo and its owners, this scenario seemed far from likely. The owners were known for cutting corners at every opportunity. In fact, they were notorious for doing the bare minimum to keep the zoo running. Excessive feeding of a large animal like a gorilla, with all the expenses that entailed, seemed out of character for such a cost-conscious operation. Something else had to be going on, but no one seemed inclined to investigate or care. No one except for one man who happened to be there that day. Gary wasn't a fan of zoos. He hated seeing animals trapped in cages, far from their natural environments. But it was his daughter's birthday, and she had begged to see the animals. Reluctantly, he had agreed, hoping to make her happy. However, as they strolled through the zoo, Gary couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. The cages were small, the animals looked neglected, and the overall atmosphere was dismal. Then they came across the gorilla, sitting there in her enclosure, looking miserable and distended. His stomach turned at the sight. Something was clearly wrong, and it wasn't just overfeeding. The next day at work, Gary's thoughts kept returning to the gorilla. He couldn't let it go. He worked as an investigative journalist and had exposed plenty of wrongdoing in his career, but he had never looked into animal neglect before. Maybe it was time to start. He immediately opened an investigation into the zoo, wondering if neglect or even outright cruelty was the cause of the gorilla's condition. He reached out to a colleague, Sarah, to help him dig deeper into the zoo's operations. He had taken photos during his visit, and they started there. It went viral, capturing the attention of animal lovers and concerned citizens across the internet. The image sparked outrage and countless questions. Why was this gorilla in such poor condition? Was she sick? What was the zoo doing to address it? As the photo made rounds, it eventually caught the eye of someone who could make a real difference, a veterinarian named Dr. Wayne Tucker. Wayne had been working at a clinic not far from the zoo and was immediately struck by the photo. The gorilla's condition appeared alarming, and the story accompanying the photo suggested that the animal could barely stand up, wasn't eating, and might even be depressed. For Wayne, this was more than just a case of neglect. It looked like the gorilla was suffering from something far more serious. Wayne decided to act. He called the zoo to ask about the gorilla, but when he finally got through, he was surprised to be met by a police officer on the other end of the line. The zoo had come under investigation due to the public outcry, and the authorities were looking into potential animal abuse. However, Wayne quickly realized that the investigation wasn't moving quickly, and the animals, including the gorilla, were not receiving the medical care they needed. Wayne saw an opportunity. He contacted the lead investigator, offering his services as a vet to help evaluate the animals. After some back and forth, Wayne was granted access to the zoo. He arrived at the facility with a mix of excitement and trepidation, hoping he could help the gorilla before it was too late. When Wayne arrived, he met with the zoo's head vet, a tired-looking woman who seemed resigned to the situation. "We've been overwhelmed," she admitted. "The owners aren't cooperating much, and most of the staff have already left. I haven't had a chance to do a thorough checkup on the gorilla yet, but from what I can tell, it's not good." She gestured toward the enclosure where the gorilla lay motionless. Wayne approached cautiously, his heart sinking as he observed the animal up close. The gorilla's belly was alarmingly distended, and she seemed barely responsive. "What do you think it is?" Wayne asked. The head vet shrugged. "Could be any number of things. Bloat, maybe? Or something wrong with her digestive system. Honestly, we've been so stretched thin here that I haven't had the time to do anything more than a cursory check." Wayne wasn't satisfied with that answer. He knew this gorilla needed immediate attention. "Do you mind if I take a closer look?" he asked. The vet agreed, and Wayne wasted no time. He carefully entered the gorilla's enclosure, keeping a safe distance at first to gauge her reaction. Surprisingly, she barely acknowledged his presence, too lethargic and weak to move. This was a bad sign. He needed to figure out what was causing her condition before it was too late. As Wayne examined the gorilla, he quickly realized the problem was gastrointestinal. Her stomach was swollen, and there was clear evidence that she hadn't been able to pass waste for quite some time. There was something blocking her intestines, preventing normal digestion. Wayne's heart raced as he pieced together the clues. If he didn't act fast, the gorilla wouldn't survive much longer. He turned to the head vet. "We need to operate," he said urgently. "There's something blocking her intestines, and if we don't remove it, she's not going to make it." The head vet hesitated. "Are you sure? It's risky." "We don't have a choice," Wayne replied. "It's her only chance." After a brief discussion, they gathered the necessary tools and prepared for the surgery. Wayne administered a sedative to the gorilla, and as she slipped into unconsciousness, he made the first incision. His hands moved quickly but carefully as he navigated through the layers of muscle and tissue, finally reaching the gorilla's swollen intestines. What he found shocked him. The blockage wasn't caused by a natural illness. It was the result of something far more insidious: plastic. Wayne pulled out a tangled mass of plastic trays, the kind used to store animal food. It was clear that the zoo staff hadn't been properly discarding these trays, and at some point, the gorilla had ingested them. The plastic had blocked her intestines, preventing her from digesting food properly and causing her stomach to swell. It was a miracle she had survived this long. With the plastic removed, Wayne quickly cleaned and stitched up the wound, administering fluids to keep the gorilla hydrated. The surgery had been a success, but now came the difficult part: waiting to see if she would recover. The next morning, Wayne returned to the zoo, his heart pounding with anticipation. He rushed to the gorilla's enclosure, half expecting the worst. But when he arrived, he was greeted by an incredible sight. The gorilla was awake, her eyes alert, and her breathing steady. She was still weak, but there was a spark of life in her that hadn't been there the day before. Wayne breathed a sigh of relief. The surgery had worked. The gorilla was on the road to recovery. Over the next few days, Wayne continued to monitor the gorilla's progress. Her strength slowly returned, and she began to show interest in food again. The swelling in her stomach gradually subsided, and soon she was able to stand and move around her enclosure. It was nothing short of a medical miracle. As news of the gorilla's recovery spread, the zoo came under even more scrutiny. Gary's investigation revealed a pattern of neglect and mismanagement that went far beyond the gorilla's case. Animal welfare organizations and local authorities launched a full-scale investigation into the zoo's operations, and it wasn't long before the owners were forced to shut down the facility for good. The animals were relocated to sanctuaries and better-run zoos, where they would receive the care they deserved. Wayne's efforts to save the gorilla had not only given her a second chance at life, but had also played a crucial role in bringing attention to the larger issue of animal neglect at the zoo. For Wayne, the experience was a reminder of why he had become a veterinarian in the first place. He had always felt a deep responsibility to protect animals, and in this case, his determination had made all the difference. As for the gorilla, she was transferred to a wildlife sanctuary where she could live out the rest of her days in peace. She was given a name, Hope, a fitting symbol of the resilience and strength she had shown throughout her ordeal. And as for Gary, his investigation had not only exposed the dark underbelly of a poorly run zoo, but had also sparked a broader conversation about the ethics of keeping animals in captivity. He continued his work as a journalist, advocating for better treatment of animals and ensuring that facilities like the zoo he had visited would be held accountable for their actions. In the end, the sad image of the bloated gorilla that had gone viral became a symbol of change. It led to the rescue of not only one animal, but many others, and it reminded people everywhere that even in the face of cruelty and neglect, there is always hope for a better future.